Emma meandered through the aisles of the crowded bookstore, her fingers grazing the spines of books as she passed. The hum of soft chatter and the faint rustling of pages surrounded her, a comforting symphony that spoke to the depth of her love for these quiet, familiar spaces. She was here to escape, to lose herself in stories that felt more real than the life waiting for her outside. Her eyes scanned the shelves, landing on a familiar title she had been meaning to read for months. Reaching for it, her fingers brushed against something, or rather, someone. A slight shock ran through her as she quickly pulled her hand back. She looked up, startled, to meet the gaze of a man she had never seen before. His features were relaxed, though there was a flicker of surprise in his expression. He offered a sheepish smile, a quiet acknowledgement of the accidental touch. "Sorry," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "No, it's fine," he replied with a casual chuckle, stepping aside to give her more space. His eyes, though brown and unremarkable at first glance, held something that made her pause. Curiosity? Humor? She couldn't quite place it. They both reached for the same book again, this time more deliberately. Their hands brushed once more, and the tension was undeniable, even if only for a brief second. "Looks like we're after the same thing," he said, his voice low but warm. Emma couldn't help but notice the easy confidence in his words, the way he spoke as if they had shared something beyond the awkwardness of their first interaction. She nodded, her breath catching for reasons she couldn't explain. "I've been wanting to read this for a while. I can lend you my copy, if you'd like," he said, the suggestion light-hearted but offering a glimpse into something unspoken. Emma shook her head, smiling despite herself. "I think I'd like to experience it for the first time myself. But, I'm Emma." She extended her hand almost instinctively, unsure of the impulse that drove her to introduce herself. "Jack," he said, accepting her handshake. His grip was warm, firm, but there was a certain gentleness about him that made her feel at ease, almost as if she had known him longer than a few fleeting moments. They both stood in the same aisle, the weight of the shared moment stretching out between them. Neither seemed in a rush to walk away, as if the space between them had quietly become an unspoken bond. The air was thick with the possibility of more words, more shared moments. Neither had expected to meet a stranger in a bookstore, but here they were, caught in the serendipity of it all. "I was just about to grab a coffee," Jack said, glancing toward the small cafe tucked in the corner of the bookstore. "Would you want to join me?" Emma hesitated, feeling the initial uncertainty that came with new interactions. But something about Jack's easygoing demeanor urged her to say yes. "Sure. I'd like that." And with that, the beginning of something unexpected began to unfold. The cafe was small but inviting, its rustic charm creating an intimate atmosphere that seemed to cut through the noise of the busy bookstore. Jack led Emma to a table by the window, where sunlight filtered through the glass, casting soft shadows on the wooden table. The hum of quiet conversation and the scent of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, an oasis of calm in the midst of the crowded store. Emma sat down, still processing the unexpected connection she'd just made. Jack had been easy to talk to, something about him made the silence between them comfortable, not awkward. She smiled as he placed their drinks in front of her, a warm cappuccino and a dark roast she hadn't ordered but had a feeling she would enjoy. "Hope I didn't get your order wrong," Jack said with a grin as he settled into his chair across from her. "No, this looks perfect," Emma replied, surprised at how natural the conversation felt. There was none of the usual nervousness she often felt when meeting someone new. It was as if the world outside the cafe had faded away, and the two of them were simply two people sharing a moment in time. "So, Emma," Jack began, leaning slightly forward as he studied her with genuine interest. "What's a book like this," he gestured toward the novel she had picked up, "mean to you?" She paused, unsure how to answer at first. "I guess, it's not just about the story. It's about finding something that connects with me, you know? Something that makes me feel less alone. Or gives me a new perspective on life." She shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "I sound kind of cheesy, don't I?" Jack smiled warmly, shaking his head. "Not at all. It's nice, actually. I think a lot of people read just to escape, but it's rare to meet someone who wants to find something in the books they read." "Yeah," Emma agreed softly. "Maybe that's why I like it here so much. Books have a way of offering what I can't seem to find anywhere else." The silence that followed was comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding. Jack seemed to be processing her words, his expression thoughtful. He took a sip of his coffee, his gaze never leaving hers. "I think that's why I love books too," Jack said after a moment. "They help me feel less disconnected." Like, in a world that sometimes feels overwhelming, they're a reminder that someone else has felt the same way. That maybe we're all a little more alike than we think. Emma was taken aback by his insight. There was something vulnerable about him, something real that made her want to know more. She smiled, feeling a warmth she hadn't expected to find in such a brief encounter. "You're different from what I expected," she said, her voice quieter now. "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" Jack asked, his tone teasing yet genuine. "Definitely a good thing," Emma answered without hesitation. "I don't meet people who are this easy to talk to very often." Jack leaned back in his chair, his eyes softening. "I guess we're just two strangers finding something familiar in each other." The words hung between them, simple but profound. Emma realized that she didn't want this conversation to end. She didn't want to walk away from Jack and the unexpected connection they had formed. She had entered the bookstore expecting nothing more than to browse for a book, and now, she was sitting across from a stranger who already seemed to understand her more than most people she knew. And that feeling, of something new and unexpected, felt more real than anything she had anticipated. As the afternoon wore on, the cafe grew quieter. The late hour had started to thin the crowd, leaving only a few patrons who seemed as lost in their own thoughts as Emma and Jack. The comfortable hum of their conversation continued, with laughter here and there, but there was a noticeable shift. The connection they'd formed felt like it had deepened in ways neither of them had expected. Emma found herself becoming acutely aware of how natural it all felt, this easy conversation with someone she had just met. She found herself stealing glances at Jack as he spoke, fascinated by the way his eyes lit up when he talked about his love for literature. There was an honesty in his voice that made her feel like she had known him for years, not just hours. But there was something else. An undercurrent of tension that lingered just beneath the surface, subtle but palpable. Emma couldn't ignore it, nor could she fully explain it. She had met people before, and she had shared conversations like this before, but never had it felt this intimate. As Jack talked about a novel he had recently read, Emma found her thoughts drifting. She couldn't help but notice the way his words seemed to weave effortlessly, almost as though every sentence he spoke was meant for her. There was a quiet vulnerability to him that she hadn't seen in others. It was clear he wasn't just talking to fill the space, he was sharing pieces of himself. And that realization hit her like a wave. She hadn't come to the bookstore looking for someone to connect with. She had just wanted a quiet afternoon away from the noise of her life. But now, here she was, with Jack, someone who, in the span of a few hours, had made her feel seen in ways she hadn't thought possible. "So, what about you?" Jack asked, pulling Emma out of her thoughts. "What's your favorite book? The one that changed the way you see the world?" The question hung in the air, and Emma felt a flicker of uncertainty. She had never really thought about it that way. She had always gravitated toward books that provided an escape, a break from reality. But now, the idea of a book that could change the way she saw the world suddenly seemed like something more important than she had ever realized. "Honestly," she began, her voice quieter now, I think it's the Bell Jar * by Sylvia Plath." Jack's expression softened, his eyes never leaving hers. "That's a powerful choice," he said quietly. "What did it teach you?" Emma paused, taking a deep breath. She hadn't expected to open up like this. But something about Jack made her feel safe, as though she could say things she hadn't been able to voice before. "It taught me that sometimes, we're all just trying to hold it together, even when it feels like everything is falling apart." She smiled weakly. "I think I've been trying to do that for a long time." Jack was quiet for a moment, his gaze thoughtful. There was a weight to his silence, as though he understood more than words could convey. "I think we all try to hold it together," he said finally. "But sometimes, it's okay to let it go. To let someone else see the pieces of you that you're scared to show." The words struck a chord deep inside Emma. She didn't know why, but something about the way Jack spoke felt like an invitation, a door opening to a part of herself she had kept locked away for far too long. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of what had been shared lingered between them, pulling them closer despite the invisible walls they both tried to keep up. The tension was undeniable, but it wasn't uncomfortable. If anything, it felt like a quiet promise of something more. Something unspoken, yet palpable. Jack broke the silence, his voice low and gentle. "I'm glad I met you today, Emma." Her heart skipped a beat, and she looked up at him, her own feelings reflected in his gaze. "Me too, Jack. Me too." The cafe was quiet now, the only sound the soft clink of coffee cups and the occasional murmur from the remaining patrons. The last rays of sunlight filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across the table where Emma and Jack sat today. The air between them felt charged, heavy with everything they hadn't yet said but somehow both knew. The connection was undeniable. Emma shifted in her seat, her hand instinctively reaching for her coffee cup, but her mind was elsewhere. It was hard to ignore the shift in her heart, the part of her that had begun to recognize something deeper than just a chance encounter. She glanced up at Jack, his attention still focused on her, his expression warm and steady. There was an intensity in his gaze, like he was waiting for something. "I've been thinking about what you said earlier," she started, her voice low, more tentative than usual. "About letting someone else see the pieces of me." Jack nodded, his smile softening as he leaned forward slightly, as though inviting her to share more. "And what do you think? Are you ready to let go of some of those pieces?" The question was simple, but the weight of it pressed against Emma's chest. She had built walls for years, convinced that they were the only thing keeping her safe. But in the span of a few hours, Jack had managed to chip away at them with nothing more than his presence, his understanding. She hadn't expected to feel this way, hadn't anticipated that something as simple as a bookstore encounter could turn into this quiet unraveling. "I think," she began, then hesitated, not quite sure how to put it into words. "I think I'm afraid." Jack's expression didn't change. He didn't offer any empty reassurances. Instead, he simply looked at her, his gaze full of understanding, like he already knew what she was struggling to say. "Afraid of what?" he asked gently, his voice unwavering. Emma let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding, then leaned back in her chair, trying to gather her thoughts. "Afraid of letting someone in again. Afraid of being seen, really seen, and realizing it's not what I want." There was a long silence, but this time it wasn't heavy with discomfort. It was a quiet space between them, filled with something both fragile and real. "Emma," Jack said, his voice softer than before, "you don't have to rush into anything. I'm not asking you to give all of yourself away at once. I'm just asking if you're willing to try. To see where this could go, even if it's just one step at a time." The simplicity of his words made her heart ache. She had spent so long guarding her heart, but in Jack's eyes, she saw something that made her want to trust him, to take that first step out of the darkness she'd been hiding in. For the first time in a long while, Emma allowed herself to feel the weight of possibility. It wasn't a promise, but it was enough to make her believe in the idea of something more. Something real. "I think," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly with the weight of the decision she was making. "I think I'm ready to try." Jack's smile spread slowly across his face, genuine and warm. "That's all I'm asking for." Emma felt something shift within her, like a door that had been locked for so long had finally creaked open, even just a crack. It wasn't an end, but it was the beginning of something. Something new, something worth taking the risk for. As they sat in the quiet glow of the fading afternoon, Emma felt the weight of her own heart, now lighter than it had been in years. And with Jack sitting across from her, not pushing, not demanding, but simply waiting, she knew that maybe, just maybe, she